And looking ahead to 2018, there's an enormous amount coming your way throughout the state of Connecticut, from trails to finishing widening in Waterbury to really beginning in earnest the reconstruction of the Walk Bridge, Atlantic Street Bridge replacement in Stamford, and doing some things for our bus system, including a smart card, which will be one of a kind in the country, bringing fare capping and special features to bus customers. We will also be starting up very shortly the new Hartford line, and you saw that being constructed. That is probably one of the only brand new rail lines from soup to nuts in the country, and we did that here in Connecticut, and we're about to open that service in this spring. Which brings me to where are we today, and all that's been accomplished because of a robust federal and state transportation fund. And we have just hit the wall, so to speak, on the State Transportation Fund. What you see before you is a graph of the budget for transportation in the Special Transportation Fund as it was adopted this past legislative session in October. And for those of you who take a look at this, it's a pretty scary picture. It has essentially deficits every fiscal year in the operating budget side, cumulatively to $388 million. And at the same time, we're also seeing not enough revenue to support debt service. So what happens with the transportation fund? This is what the expenses go to. The largest amount goes to debt service. So I'll pause for a minute. That's how we pay for capital projects. We sell bonds, and we pay them over 20 years. So this is effectively debt service in this year for bonds that have been sold over the last 20 years. So it's an accumulating debt service issue. The next largest is DOT operations, and that includes all of our highway operations, plowing, and it includes all the subsidy for bus and rail, and I'll get to that later. And it includes pension and fringes. What's fascinating about this chart is that only 40% of everything in the trust fund is controlled by the DOT. Everything else is not, which is a difficult balancing act for the department. And this is really what's happening to the trust fund and part of the pressure on why we've got deficits. The green bars at the bottom are the operating budgets for the DOT, and they've been growing over time. But what's been growing fastest is debt service. And in fact, in the last couple of years, if you accumulate it, it's growing at about 74%, which is an enormous increase in debt service. Again, sort of historic borrowing now hitting the books. The last piece is a program called Let's Go CT. The governor put out a new plan for transportation, $2.8 billion over 5 years. Frankly, we haven't spent most of that. In fact, it's just a few $1 million that we bonded on that program, and it's at this point in jeopardy of additional funding. And probably on the revenue side, the most significant issue is what's happened to the price of gasoline at the wholesale level. The top line here is your gas tax, and it's about flat because the gas tax hasn't changed in 20 years. And so it's about the same number of people, about the same revenue. What's changed is the gross receipts tax. So there's a second component that you pay at the pump, which is passed on at the wholesale side of sales. So when the gas price went from $4 a gallon to $2 a gallon, we effectively lost $140 million in that period of revenues that were anticipated to help pay for those expenses that I just talked about. And so come October, when the budget was adopted, we had a deficit trust fund, and we had $1 billion of project expenses to pay this fiscal year for contractors that are currently doing projects for us, and nothing in the fund to pay for them. And so we had to figure out how to rebalance the transportation fund without additional revenues, and I'll make that point several times. My job at this point, because there is not enough revenue in the fund, was to sell bonds, and to do that I had to create a budget proposal that we could go to the bond market with. We did that, and I'll tell you that we were successful to sell bonds, but that program is what I'll get into in terms of what's in that program that we created solely to sell bonds to pay bills this year. And I'll come back to the last red line, which is that you can't solve the problem of the transportation fund by cutting expenses. There's not enough there to cut. So what's this? So I'm trying to put it in simple terms. So this is my grandson. who got a new bicycle at Toys R Us last week because they're bankrupt. And he wanted to know, what that was about, but he assumed that the reason that they're in financial trouble is because they don't know how to spell. But we went further in the conversation because he's a very smart 6-year-old, and he said to me, "What does it mean to be bankrupt, Grandpa?" And I said, "Well, it means Toys R Us borrowed money that they had to pay interest on, and they didn't have enough money to pay it back." And he said, "That sounds like your transportation fund, Grandpa." So to put it in simple terms, my grandson gets it. We borrowed more than we have money to pay back. Here's my problem, the problem statement that I just wanted to share. With the deficits in the trust fund, we don't, at DOT, control the revenue side. We don't control income. That's the legislature. We don't control the debt service because it's historic debt service. In fact, if we stopped bonding today, we'd still have to pay off 20 years worth of debt. And the DOT doesn't control the personnel or benefit expenses. They're done by contract, and I don't negotiate those contracts. They're done separately. And in fact, in this contract, you can't lay people off either. So in terms of what's left for me to control the balance of the budget, you can assume there's not much leverage left. So we were forced to go through an exercise, as I said, to sell bonds. The other piece of the bond problem is that the budget assumed that we would be selling $900 million of bonds this year, but the budget only had enough to sell 800, which we did. And it also assumed that we'd be up to $1.2 billion in 2 years, and the budget cuts that to $600 million. So effectively, the budget that was adopted only has half of the debt service that we would need to continue all of our capital programs and operating funds. So we went through an operating budget reduction exercise as well as a capital budget reduction exercise. And first, let me start with the operating side. So I told you that my budget is, for DOT, has several components. The biggest part, 62% of the budget at DOT, is to pay for subsidy to operate trains and buses. And that's about half and half, half for buses, half for trains. It's a huge number. But just be clear that trains don't make money, buses don't make money, and the state has, frankly, generously and importantly over time, valued public transportation to subsidize it to the tune of 62% of the whole DOT budget. And the rest is really highway operations, which is mostly people who do the highway plowing and maintenance, and that's what keeps your roads safe and clear. Trying to cut expenses really means I got to look at both of those, and the largest piece of that is transit. But the first thing we did was to look at efficiencies within DOT. We've been doing that for years through what we call lean process innovation, where we have simplified and made far more efficient how we do business and execute projects and do processing of financial transactions and work with our partners, including other state government agencies. And it's been amazing what we've been able to achieve. To put that in some perspective, I've been commissioner for 7 years, and knock on wood, that's a real record, and I'm happy about it. I want to be around for a while. 7 years ago, our capital program, our construction program was $400 million, and there were 3,300 people at DOT supporting that. This year, we have $1.2 billion, 3 times that, with 2,450 employees. And part of that has been just reduction in personnel, and part of it is the efficiencies we've been able to take on. But the other thing we did was to cut personnel. And so if additional revenues aren't forthcoming, there will be a 15% permanent reduction in DOT staff. And I won't read through all of this, but I'll make some points. Department by department, we are at the brink of failure because of these cuts. In the highway division, we're split up into 4 divisions around the state. 3 of the 4 divisions have no director in them. It's vacant. And there's only 1 of 2 bridge maintenance managers in the state. At the day-to-day level, there's only 1 person maintaining all the radios for all of our equipment, all the trucks in the state of Connecticut. There used to be 6. And we have half of the positions to maintain traffic signals. And so if they're not working, you can understand maybe why. This level of staffing will impact forever, if it doesn't get replaced, our ability to plow snow in a timely fashion, and will affect the highway maintenance conditions. Finance and administration, which is the nuts and bolts of making things happen, is a severely handicapped group right now with a chief administrative officer who is really a critical cog who's retiring next month. There's every facet of finance and administration with vacancies and many, many more to come. 2018 will be a banner retirement year at DOT, mostly because of benefit packages and age, as people have entered the DOT years ago and can retire. And frankly, that's my senior management leaders. And so it's going to really leave us pretty well neutralized. Engineering and construction, which is our whole construction program, has 125 vacancies. That's a massive number. It's about 25% for that organization. April 1st are 8 top people in the organization leaving. Massive programs like replacing the Hartford Viaduct, the project manager leaves today. The assistant chief engineer is vacant, and many of our innovative things that you've seen here, that accelerated bridge program, design, build, contracting, and alternative procurement are all functions that we don't have the staff to support anymore. Public transportation is a relatively small part of DOT. It's fewer than 100 people. Remember, it's 60% of our operating budget and 40% of our capital program, 100 people, but there's 23% vacancies with 13 more to come. So it's a significant problem in public transportation. And in the spring, we're going to open up a brand new high-speed rail line with effectively far fewer people. Policy and planning, similar saga, old story. You've heard it already, but we're pretty handicapped. And this is the group that actually develops the numbers that drive our capital funding from the federal government. And sort of this is the administration or my office. I will have no legal counsel in 2 weeks. My IT program has no manager. The affirmative action program has a vacancy, is completely vacant. So this is the impact of what's happening because of budget cuts within the DOT. So that's a story of woe, but really what's worse is what's coming, because that's really covering the 40% of the budget that's not the public transit side, because I couldn't save all the money by doing that. So what's proposed, and what we've had public hearings and had meetings like this about, is what's happening and potentially happening by July 1st. So a 14.3% fare increase on bus, eliminating non-ADA bus service with cuts in transit districts this year and again in 2020. I want to minimize what's on this slide. These are massive, impactful, and horrifying cuts, which mean for many people, many of you in the room perhaps, this could mean no service, this could mean no jobs, this could mean no school, this could mean no medical appointments. On the rail side, it's far more dramatic, perhaps, to get to the budget numbers that we had to save. And by the way, all of these cuts on the operating budget amount to about $60 million. So there's a lot to do to get the $60 million, but it's a 10% fare increase 1 year and then 2 subsequent years for a total of 21% over a 3-year subsequent period. Plus eliminating weekend and off-peak service on the branch lines and more significant impacts and reductions in service on Shoreline East. These kinds of proposals are not things that I as commissioner advocate or the department advocates. Frankly, I come from a transit background. This hurts to watch this. This is, if these have to get done because we can't fix the transportation fund income, these will reverse decades of investment in bus and rail, improvements, great service, and frankly, a system that, as you can see from the beginning, I'm very proud of and the state should be proud of. But these cuts would be devastating and frankly, irreversible if we don't find a solution. That's not enough to balance the transportation fund. To get the debt service down to $600 million from what was supposed to be $1.2 billion, we have postponed indefinitely $4.3 billion of capital projects over 5 years. That represents over 40% of our entire capital program, and all of those projects are absolutely essential state of good repair projects. If we didn't make this cut, our capital program would be about $2 billion a year, over 5 years, $10 billion. And that still means we'd have $3 billion of unmet state of good repair needs in those 5 years. If we cut 4.3, we will not be able to sustain state of good repair on our highways, bridges, or rail and bus systems. It also would cut municipal aid in the form of town aid road, local transportation improvement projects, and local bridge projects. And the consequence of that, over the years, we've added extra money from the Transportation Fund to support town investments in transportation. Without this, the only alternative left to maintain roads and bridges locally will be local taxes, and that's not something that we're happy about either. To date, we've postponed this year alone $400 million of projects and $60 million of projects that cannot be constructed this year because we've missed the construction season based on the kind of project they were. That number will continue to grow by the end of the fiscal year. So, in summary, without additional income, we had to go through this entire exercise, make these proposals, and be ready to implement them. And with that, we were able to go to the bond market to sell the bonds that I talked about at the beginning to pay construction bills this year. So we sold $800 million worth of bonds. That's all we could sell. We have $1 billion of projects to pay for, so we still might have to go back. And this program really can't be sustained even for next year because at the end of that, there's still a deficit in 2020. So this is not the answer. This is, if it's any answer, it just was able to pay bills this year, but the consequences are awful for the capital program, for the operating program, and certainly for bus and train riders. So I'll talk a few minutes about revenue because that's the other option. And I'll just some background. The gas tax was reduced 20 years ago and has not been increased. If it were increased or indexed to inflation at that point, it would be back to where it was. If it had stayed at 39 cents rather than 25, we would have $3.6 billion worth of revenue that would have been in the fund, and we would not be cutting anything. But that's not, I can't go backwards, but that's the consequence of that. Our gas tax, and because I said that it's not been increased for 20 years, is not low by any means. The combination of the gross receipts tax and the gas tax puts us at or above some of our neighboring states, but all those states have tolls to help pay for transportation, and Connecticut doesn't. And to further sort of punctuate the problem, and what really bothers me is that with the gas tax not increased and the fund not able to support transportation, we have over the course of 20 years raised bus fares by 75%, rail fares by 54%. And if this proposal happens in July, bus fares will have gone up 100%, and rail fares by 85% over that same period of time. The legislature has worked on this funding solution before. In 2015, they acted to put some sales tax revenues into the transportation fund, up to 0.5% by 2018, which helped postpone what we're into this year. But the money coming in from sales tax isn't materializing at the rate that we forecast either. We're at about $310 million for fiscal 18 as opposed to 340. So the gross receipts tax isn't bringing in what we thought, the sales tax isn't bringing in what we thought, and debt service is rising, and therefore we have this funding crisis. In the budget that was just adopted, the legislature also supported the dedication of new car sales tax, which today goes in the general fund, but starting in 2021, would gradually go into the transportation fund to try to help pay for this revenue stream that we need. It's not enough early enough to solve the problem as it's been proposed, but clearly it's been recognized we have a problem. The problem is we don't have a solution yet for this year. The governor did propose as part of his budget a solution, which was not just short-term but long-term, and the combination of gas tax, new car sales tax, a tire fee, and ultimately tolling by 2023 would be a long-term sustainable and short-term solution that would avoid all the service cuts, all the fare increases, and all the capital program cuts. And that's what the trust fund looks like with the governor's proposals. So it creates a surplus, it creates a positive balance, and it eliminates all the possible consequences that we talk about for July 1st. We just heard from the Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth where They effectively supported a similar program to what the governor proposed with increased gas tax, a new car sales tax, and tolls to help pay for transportation, because they view transportation as the critical investment to actually boost the economy and not actually create negative impacts to the economy. And the legislature's in session, and they have this to struggle with, and I don't envy them for that challenge, because the transportation fund compounds what's already a problem in the general fund, and these are tough decisions to make. And I'll finally close with this, just to put things in perspective, and why I'm advocating for transportation revenue to fix the problem as opposed to cuts. The average household in Connecticut pays $150 a month for a cell phone, $150 a month for internet, $150 a month for utilities. And that's average, and I know that there's all kinds of variations in that, but only $15 a month to the transportation fund. That hasn't changed in 20 years. At the same time, the average monthly rail fare is $362, and it will go up by 21% if we don't stop the cuts. And the bus fare is $42, and that will go up by 14% if we don't change that. So from my perspective, this is a value proposition that's upside down. And the final piece of this is, and it's not on the chart, but the average household spends $91.66 on coffee. Thank you.
Department of Transportation Commissioner James Redeker, and he has been going around the state to different towns to give this presentation, and then what we're going to do now is shortly really turn the meeting over to you and ask you for your thoughts and your questions. I've been with Commissioner Redeker in several towns, Danbury, Stamford, New Canaan, and we all thought it would be a great idea for him to come to Norwalk. After Gail and Terry have some comments, in terms of the format, what I thought we would do is really want to have anyone who wants to speak or ask questions, we want to give you that opportunity. We've got well over an hour and a half to do that. What I'm going to ask is, we've got a pretty good turnout, is maybe we keep everyone to about 3 minutes, roughly. I mean, I'll give you a nudge when we get close to that. And we'll kind of try to keep our answers short, so we'll do more listening and you'll do more talking, hopefully. And this way we can get around and you know, make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. And I just want to let you know that the Commissioner did give a presentation, but we're really here to also talk about a lot of Norwalk issues. So things like, and this is not an all-inclusive list, but things like the walk bridge, things like the Wall Street train station, things like our bus service here in town. Things like the Route 7 interchange, or East Avenue, or Route 1 with the curb cuts. You see where I'm going with this. Really, anything that is affecting us here in town is a legitimate, topic for questions and discussion. So with that, I'll ask Representative Wood and then Larry Al just to give some comments, and then we'll move forward.
Hey, does this work? Great, thank you very much. And thank you all so much for being here. It's a great crowd, and it is essential we hear what you're thinking. It's essential to hear the presentation from Commissioner Redeker. Thank you, Commissioner Redeker, for coming down here. He's got a 24/7 schedule the last year, certainly. Again, we want to hear what you're thinking, what your questions are, and what your issues are. We represent you, and we're your voice, and we want to hear from you. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks, Terry.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming. It is really very important that we know what your thinking is and how this affects you. I think it's important to keep one thing in perspective, and I've heard Commissioner Redeker's presentation in several other venues, Danbury and in the Capitol and so on. And one thing is very clear. The DOT and Commissioner Redeker are playing with the hand that has been dealt to them. As he said, he doesn't control the revenues that come in, and he doesn't control the contracts that have been negotiated with employees, which have extremely expensive fringe benefits because that's how the state contracts work. They're better than any of you or us could ever hope to have. But that doesn't mean that this is a done deal. It doesn't mean that the bereft actual status of the DOT has to be. Because money is money. And when the budget is put together for the state, it's just as possible to say, you know, we've got money over here in these programs, we're going to put them in transportation, and suddenly it's going to be something else that's starving. So as we think about how to fund all these projects and these fares and this service, it's important to remember that these are decisions that have to be made taking everything that's provided to residents of the state into account. And there is nothing that dictates that the revenues that go to the special transportation fund for all of this have to be transportation-related revenues. They can come from absolutely anywhere. And so as we look at what's before us, there are decisions to make about how money is spent on transportation. We have to look at the spending side. But when we look at the revenue side, we have to look everywhere. That includes all the things the commissioner mentioned. It includes tolls, it includes tire taxes and gas taxes and things like that. But it's all relative. And you have to look at how they fit in with each other, how much they cost to implement, and how much they will cost you if we do, and then figure out what the benefit is in terms of revenue. And in many cases, we haven't had those figures yet. So we're looking forward to it as much as you are so that we can think about this intelligently. We look forward to your comments.
Well, great. Well, let's get started. All right. I saw your hand go up first, Mike. Go, you go.
All right. First of all, I want to thank all three of you for organizing this and coming here.
I'm just going to ask, please state your name, everyone.
I'm Mike Davis. I live on East Rocks Road in
Yes.
Marlboro.
Yeah.
I do thank you for that. I came here with really two questions in mind. One of which was the result of a meeting that was had, what, about a year and a half ago now? About the West Rocks Bridge being repaired and replaced. I'd like to hear something about the status of that now. I'm being an East Rocks Road guy. Originally they were talking about detouring up my street, which I think is horrific. So I'd like to hear what the status is of that project. My second point when I was coming here was to talk about the light at the corner of West Rocks Road and Route 7, which has been an enigma for me for years. Fred knows I keep talking about it with him every time I see him. We got to do something about that intersection. There was a couple of accidents in the last couple of months at that intersection, including one car driving off into the brook and a woman being hit. So we need better, and Fred knows what I want, but
Yeah.
so we need some of that. However, that's what I came here today to talk about. However,
Okay.
your presentation raised a lot more concerns in my mind about a lot of things. And what Gail just said actually bothered me because I would like to know, before I continue on, who do you report to, James?
Well, so I'm an appointee in the administration, and I report to Governor Malloy.
Okay.
But I also report to the Transportation Committee, where there are 38 legislators.
Not me.
Not you. I also report to the Appropriations Committee and to Revenue and Bonding.
Me.
There you go.
Me.
Which means.
So the point now that
So we'll get you sandwich.
the point was, when Gail says she doesn't have the figures yet, and you're putting up here all kinds of figures, and the governor passed, I thought I read that screen properly, the governor's proposed budget, which I'm not sure if that was, that part was passed, that was positive in terms of your, so all I'll say as a you're my representative, well, Fred's my representative, you know, you guys can get this done. You just got to work at it and get it done. But I'd like to have an answer specifically about West Rocks Road Bridge and Route 7. And
Okay, so I will disappoint you on both points. In this regard, so I don't know the issue of the traffic signal, because I have a traffic group that would know that, and I'm not up to speed on that. And there are 4,200 projects actively engaged at DOT, and I don't know the West Rock Road project. However, if anybody else wants to bring me up to speed, I'm happy to learn.
Well, the
one other thing.
well, Mike, we got to just so we can keep moving. Just to clarify, so the West Rocks Road bridge. This is the bridge over the Merritt. And you know the DOT is doing the bridges over the Merritt systematically. Is that bridge still slated to be done next year, Jim?
That's what I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, if it's a bridge in construction now,
No.
No.
it's not.
No.
So the answer is I will have to take a look at that.
Okay. The other issue that Mike raised is West Rocks Road, the same road, which is a city road. It spills into Route 7, which is a state road. And Mike is concerned when you turn left, there's no left turn signal. The opposite traffic is coming out of I-Park where, you know, LA Fitness is and Soundview Medical, and it's not a street. So that, I think, has been the barrier there. What would be quickly the process to, if we were to put a left turn signal on that light? Is there a process for that?
Yeah, sure. So a location like that on a state road will be evaluated on the basis of its accident records over time. And the highest go first, and they go down the list. The second way they come to our attention is every town has a traffic person, different titles, and based on local experience, they'll bring them to the department and say, listen, we think there's a problem, will you do an evaluation of this? And then we have a traffic group that does studies of the configuration. They bring into play all the accident records, which we maintain for the state, on the basis of criteria, which are engineering criteria for what works best in that location. We would review and or, you know, retime a light, reconfigure the intersection with different, you know, signals or lanes. But if it's not a current project, it would need one of those to generate a project. And so if it's not something that I'm aware of that's underway, then the likely answer is the best way to move this forward is to work through Norwalk and have that come through the town, through the city, as a request to me through the local traffic person.
So it would be when you say Norwalk, Jim, you mean the traffic authority for the city?
Sure.
Traffic authority is also the police commission authority, which the mayor is the primary member of. So that would be the venue. Let's move on.
Can I just
Oh,
clarify
yeah, sure.
the one, I'm sorry, and I'll only take a second, but
Yeah.
Mike, I just wanted to clarify something about figures. Certain things we have plenty of figures for. For example, accelerating the transfer of the new car sales tax. We know exactly how much that is at least estimated to be for 4 years out, $300 million a year when you get the whole thing. We know that. There are other things we don't know. For example, were we to implement tolls, how much they would cost you, what would be charged, where they are, what it would cost to install them. So there's various things we have and various things we don't, but it's really hard to make a decision when you don't have it.
Yes, you. Yes, sir. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yep, Andre, should I come up or?
No, just right there is fine.
We can hear you, it's fine.
Yeah.
Andre D'Annunzio, resident of Norwalk, student at Norwalk High School. My main focus here tonight I'm going to talk about is the Norwalk Transit District. I ride bus 12 every day. I see what they're doing. They're cutting 12 out. That's not acceptable at any level. That's not acceptable. No ADA service? That's not acceptable. I don't know how you guys can live with yourself if you guys are cutting out ADA service. And if you guys cut out Sundays, that's when people go out on weekends. Elderly people go out on weekends. I ride bus 12. I ride bus 13. I see elderly people. I see senior citizens. How could you raise the increase to $2 per seniors? how could you raise the fare to anybody? It just does not make sense. And if you cut 12 out, that means I have to walk all the way down to Connecticut Avenue and try to cross Connecticut Avenue on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. You know that's rush hour. And somebody's gonna get killed. And you know there's gonna be a lawsuit. And whose fault's gonna be that? The state. Because you're cutting out the most important part of the transportation fund. I can't stress this enough. If you cut out 12, you won't see me on the bus.
Well, thank you, Andre. And I know that there are a number of other people here tonight who I spoke with earlier who asked about the bus service, and maybe Commissioner, could you talk about that, please?
I'll talk very, yeah, and we have the general manager from Norwalk Transit District here who could also speak to the issue. So I'll make a general introduction to the issue, and I think maybe we'll listen some more, and maybe we can have some follow-up once we hear some more of the issues. But none of the bus service cuts or fare increases are proposals that I would ever make if I didn't have to sell bonds to pay bills. Having sold the bonds, that's a bond covenant that must be executed.
Just speak up, please.
Sure, that's a bond covenant that must be executed unless there's revenues, additional revenues, to provide the equivalent income or balance in the trust fund. I come from a 30-year career in public transportation in New Jersey. It is my feeling that the cuts, if they go forward, and the fare increases that go forward, will have an economic impact and a personal impact that is devastating and is far greater than what it would take to avoid them in terms of revenue. So that's my personal position. Understand that the department's role is very limited in what we could do. And we had to sell bonds at a point when the legislature wasn't in session. There was no opportunity for additional revenue, and there was no choice but to meet those obligations. So these cuts are not intended to be things we want to do, would like to do, or actually advocate.
Well, you know, one thing I want to chime in at this point is that I'll speak for myself, but service cuts to the bus system or the train system, or what's been that the governor has proposed, are to me unacceptable. And I and a number of others have submitted a bill to fund the transportation fund for the next 5 years. And that would be by accelerating the new car sales tax that the commissioner talked about that's being phased in over 5 years. This bill phases it in, or it implements it immediately. So under that proposal, which is live and it's going through all the committees, there would be none of the service cuts that the governor proposed in his plan. I just want to make that point very, very clear. I will get to, I know you're all on the bus, we'll get to you. I'm going to, the commissioner, the transit commissioner, I think it'd be good if you came in.
I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words because I think I'm probably speaking on behalf of a lot of the people in this room that we might not get to in total detail.
And just introduce yourself.
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
First of all, let me just say good evening, elected officials, Commissioner Rediker, and to the public. And I want to say I am overwhelmed. Are you not overwhelmed by how many people really came out today? I applaud you all, and thank you, really, truly. I'm Kimberly Morton, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Norwalk Transit District. And this evening, I serve as the voice of the Norwalk Transit District, Westport Transit District, and obviously the riding public that counts on our services every day. The Norwalk Transit also serves as the operator of the Westport Transit District. We operate the Greenwich commuter shuttles and the ADA operator for the Connecticut Transit Stamford Division. Our combined operations cost approximately $15 million annually, consisting of $12.2 million from Connecticut Department of Transportation, which we've always had a positive working relationship with. $1.9 million is generated primarily from passenger revenue, from many of you that are probably in this room, and $900,000 comes in local contributions. We carry over 1.4 million passengers annually on our fixed route and shuttle services, and our door-to-door services for the elderly and disabled, we transport about 100,000 passengers annually. The City of Norwalk now is experiencing significant growth in the form of transit-oriented development and has numerous plans to really address the T in transit-oriented development. Unfortunately, those plans remain just that, due to years of really inadequate funding to support existing services with no room for consideration of new services. In fiscal year 2016, the transit district was flat funded. In FY 2017, we received a 2% decrease. FY 18 brought another flat funded year, and I think we all know flat does not mean flat services. It means a decrease in cuts to services. To address that financial shortfall, the transit district was forced to eliminate approximately $700,000 on our fixed route operating side. And we made cuts in January of 2017 and again in 2018. Now we're asked to cut an additional 15% possibly, or $1.2 million in FY19. That is going to have a devastating impact on our system and the services that we provide. We anticipate about a 17.5% reduction in ridership, which equates to about 250,000 trips annually. There's really no low-hanging fruit left here for us to address. We did that the last time. Yes, there was room to cut things because when we attacked it that time, we attacked it from a perspective that we wanted to make sure that there were alternatives for the riding public. Some, maybe not the most convenient alternatives, but we really left opportunities and made sure there were other things out there. We're concerned about the tremendous void that's going to leave in the community, and I call it a transportation desert, where there's going to be really no ways in and out of certain areas in our community, only by car. This next round of proposed service revisions, with the gentleman right here mentioned, because we've already gone through some of our public outreach to address this, because we can't be left behind and run in the red anymore, our agency. Those days are really gone for us. So we will be looking to eliminate evenings, Monday through Saturday, all Sunday services. We're going to additionally look to have to target fixed route services, purposely target areas so that we can shrink our ADA service, and that's to the elderly and disabled. And the reason we have to do that is all of our local money right now that we get, almost over $500,000 from the City of Norwalk, is put into those services to maintain what we're currently doing. There's no more room. We don't have another penny to throw at it. So it's terrible to say. I've been in this business for 35 years, and I have never, ever have been faced with such a challenge as we're faced with right here, right now. And on top of all that, we're going to look to raise the fare by 15% and move to the $2. We believe that the demand for public transportation service in our community will grow if funded sufficiently. Our failure as a state to adequately invest in the essential elements of our public transportation system will only cost us more in the long run. Investment in public transportation will help support a healthy, growing economy, facilitating the efficient movement of goods and people, and stimulate economic development in communities served by vibrant public transportation systems. Public transportation gets people where they need to go, and at the same time, it allows our roads and highways to work better by reducing congestion. And if you've seen the City of Norwalk in the streets, there is a lot of congestion. Reductions in state funding for transit have left us with a funding gap that threatens our ability to provide the level of service our community needs and deserves. In order to operate a sustainable public transit system, NTD must have a sufficient and predictable funding source in place that adequately addresses the service needs of our community. For many years, we've been hampered by a dramatic lack of necessary funds. We see study after study indicating many of our transit needs, and they simply get put on a shelf with absolutely no action. Recommendations, no action. We are currently working, NTD, collaboratively with our fellow transit districts to send a clear message to our state elected officials regarding the need to maintain and grow the Special Transportation Fund and ensure an equitable distribution of the fund among the transit providers in the state. This has to happen now. It can't be pushed down the road any longer without having a detrimental impact on the riding public across our state. Service cuts result in an immediate loss of ridership, which is often lost forever as people change their habits and find alternative modes of transportation. And the lesson learned is one cannot rely on the public system at all. Please do not let the final report from the Connecticut Commission of Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth become another study that just sits on the shelf. Hear the words, be bold. The state is in dire straits. The time for half measures is behind us. We also encourage a meaningful commitment by local municipalities to the mission by providing local contributions worthy to this cause. I am proud to be a part of a community that's extremely supportive of public transportation and contributes nearly, as I said before, $1 million annually to support our services. Mayor Rilling of Norwalk and First Selectman Marpy of Westport should be applauded for their substantial financial commitment to public transportation. In closing, we're asking our state leaders to take immediate action and make funding of public transportation a priority for fiscal year 2019 and beyond, and please support Senate Bill 368 that will ensure the equitable distribution of the funding across the state. Thank you really for the opportunity.
I have a follow-up question. I have a follow-up question.
No, wait,
Hold on, we'll
Fred,
just
yeah, I want to make a comment on what Kimberly mentioned.
Yeah.
Kimberly's, one, a terrific asset and advocate for public transportation, and it's always a pleasure and a joy to work together with her. What Kimberly referenced was something called the Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth Commission. They just completed their work March 1st. It was put in place with the budget process this year. October 22nd, we finally passed a budget. Governor Malloy put together a panel of 14 business leaders in this state, very successful, very bright, extremely capable, and they came up with this 78-page plan, which is available online. There is a shortened version. There's an executive summary, and I think I like the plan a great deal. I think it's balanced. I think everybody gives a little bit. And anyway, the executive summary is on there and so is the plan, so I would encourage you all to look at it. The legislature will be having to vote on it, and they are asking that we take this package as a whole and not pick it apart.
Yep, Gail?
Yeah, I also would like to thank Kimberly because I cannot imagine a world where increased fares and reduced service together makes sense. They just don't. And I think everybody who uses Norwalk Transit is lucky to have you as an advocate. That was pretty impressive, pretty eloquent. It really was. And I would just say we need something, as you said, immediate, now, urgent, right away. And a lot of these solutions aren't. But the car sales tax is something we already have. It's not new. We have it. You're paying it when you buy a new car. All we have to do is spend it on transportation instead of on something else. And I think all of us would like to see that happen, and we are pushing for that to happen as soon as we can get it through, and we hope that the rest of the legislature will be responsive.
Yeah, I just want to, before we move on to the next question, I just want to reinforce what Gail and Terry have said. You know, the spending cuts that are proposed by the governor that would impact the transit authority, by the way, great job, Kim, thank you so much for being here, are just not acceptable. Just not acceptable, and there is a very straightforward solution on the revenue side. I agree with Gail on the car sales tax. It exists already. So we are absolutely working on that, and it's an immediate solution. And as the commissioner has said, accelerating that car sales tax funds the transportation fund for the next 5 years. So it would be a more immediate kind of thing. I'm going to, let's move off to a different topic. Mike McGuire, do you want to?
Yes.
Yeah.
My name is Michael McGuire, and I'm here representing the newly formed and created Wall Street Neighborhood Association. There's 55 business owners, stakeholders, and stuff that are part of this group. And I'm here, Mr. Redeker, it was very sobering. I'm a numbers guy, too. I run a consulting practice, and I was kind of shocked. Actually, I was texting my wife saying, honey, pack up, we got to get the hell out of here.
No, no, please.
Well, I know, but until you told me that I pay more for coffee,
Yeah.
5 times more for coffee per month than I do
Yeah.
for transportation.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you on that. In fact, I do work all over the country, and in most of the areas I go, there are tolls, and where there's not tolls in heavy urban environments, it's congested, there's problems. Where there are tolls, there's opportunities and solutions. They don't happen overnight, but they do take a while. That's what I want to talk to you about specifically here. One thing here is a wonderful opportunity that we have. And that is to reactivate the Wall Street train station. I know you've heard some news about that. I'm kind of the guy pushing that a little bit. But there's some interesting things I do want you to consider going forward because you're a numbers guy. And I'll just run this by you quickly. Within walking distance to that potential station, there's 740,000 square feet of small office space. That's the equivalent of 3 Merit 7 office buildings in size.
Wow.
So it's pretty significant. In addition, there's 1.5 million square feet of retail space and just shy of a million square feet, 500,000 square feet of industrial space. But most importantly, there's almost 1.4 million square feet of recently developed high density or medium density housing, all within walking distance. So the issue is, imagine if these folks who want to come here, if they came here and they say, why would I want to choose this area? Well, if we had a train station there, best in class amenity, within walking distance, it makes it so much more feasible for them to rent here, which then stabilizes all the values of those apartment buildings, increases ground rent, so on and so forth. Because I do think a key element of not only tolls and less coffee is the fact that we need to have jobs, growing jobs.
Yeah.
The key thing we absolutely know from the work I do, I'm a commercial real estate consultant, is that if you want to attract millennials, you can't just bring them and stick them in an office building out in the middle of nowhere. They'll just leave. Highly educated millennials that we need in our workforce, they like funky urban hip downtowns, which we have, and they like public transportation, not specifically buses though. So that's why I want to advocate for this rail siding. The other key thing that I want to bring up is, and I know you've gone over this stuff and there's no money in the budget, so we got creative, and guess what? It won't cost you a dime. The private sector will build this station.
Wow.
We have structured, we have a format and a plan. That's why when it comes to you, I hope you won't say no. I hope you'll at least say, let's talk about it and listen, because the private sector will fund it. We'd even go so far as, if you're worried about ongoing maintenance and things like that, we'll put together a business improvement district to take care of that station. Because it's significant for Norwalk's growth. It's a real turnaround. A bunch of us got together and created a really positive solution to helping out. And we will all cut back on our coffee as well. But I thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have a quick comment and a question. Comment, just to give you some information. In last year's appropriation, money was put in place by the legislature to study the Wall Street station. We have forwarded that to the Bond Commission for consideration in the next meeting, which would initiate the process of study and dialogue about the Wall Street station. So we are taking that. I can't guarantee what's going to happen with that request because I don't make that decision, but we're moving it forward. Second.
Key component on that, I'd like to speak to that quickly, is if we delay this, the developer willing to do this kind of work, you can't delay a construction project because it'll kill the deal.
Yeah.
And if this gets delayed, it could potentially kill the deal. So let me just finish. If we go into studies and take 5, 8 months, it doesn't make sense. We know, ask anybody, does this make sense? And this is what I do for a living. Yes, it makes great sense. I think you should do a study to find out if it doesn't work. I would challenge you to do that.
We could do that too.
This one will work. The issue is, we can't, if
I get it. I totally understand.
Okay, thanks.
So my question, who would pay a nickel a cup of coffee to fund transportation? Nobody?
Wait, say that again.
We
It wasn't
didn't
clear what you said.
So if we spend,
Yeah,
just a curiosity question.
yes, but cut a little closer.
No.
Or this one's a little longer, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. If we're spending $91.66 on coffee and $15 a month on transportation, how many people would spend 5 cents more a cup?
No.
Nah, you see, we hit the nerve.
Apples and oranges.
times that already.
Yeah.
I'm just being facetious. It's a value question. Coffee goes up by a nickel a day. Transportation has not.
Yeah. Well, Commissioner, could you comment on the Wall Street train station? It's on the Danbury line. It's another stop on the Danbury line.
Yeah, so I'll give you my gut reaction.
Yeah.
I totally understand, and I totally appreciate that stations are economic development and create places that people want to be at. The Wall Street station will be a branch line station with only a single train that's direct to New York that would require people to transfer to the main line, which I'm not sure is all that attractive. So, and because there are other options to get to mainline stations with all of the service. I will say that if you take a look at, so we talked about this fiscal commission and a study. One thing you haven't seen, because they haven't posted it yet, is that we created for them a brand new 30-year transportation plan with a 10-year horizon to advance major initiatives to improve rail service sooner rather than later. And some of that is to create direct service on the Danbury branch, which would make the Wall Street station a direct mainline station because we would electrify to Merit 7. Brand new news for the panel here, but someday I commend you to reading what an economic development transportation plan could do for the state of Connecticut, and it's akin to what you're talking about. I'm not so sure I personally support, which is why I would look for some data, that a branch line station with really a single direct train a day to New York would have all that much attraction. But that's just an opinion because you asked for it.
Yes. Just quickly, we're going to move on to the, and I think this might be a good segue to the walk bridge. And I know there's a number of people here who I'm going to call on you to ask about that. But as you know, Commissioner, the DOT is doing work on the Danbury line as part of the Walk Bridge project, and you're doing electrical work and track work up to about a mile south of Wall Street. And what if the city were to insist that the Wall Street train station be part of any compensation, if you will, for the city bearing the burden of the Walk Bridge project? You only need to go up another mile.
Yeah, so I can't answer the question, but it is really not, it's not eligible under a federal program as sort of a quid pro quo for the Walk Bridge impacts. So it would have to be something that was funded outside of that. I'll just go back to it. There is no money in the transportation fund to do anything, particularly something that's outside a state of good repair. That's not to say it would ever be off the table in the future with sufficient revenues, but we have hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of backlog state of good repair work on the railroads, the highways, and bridges before we have enough money to advance new initiatives in a program that is now completely constrained.
All right. Well, let's move on to the Walk Bridge. Who would like?
Well, this woman in the front has had her hand up for a long time.
Well, we're going to get to everyone, but I want to.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Wells. My name is John Cohen. I'm from East Norwalk, and I'm here with Norwalk Harbor Keeper. I want to say thanks to our elected officials for calling this meeting, and thank you, Commissioner Redeker, for being here. You have a tough job. I commend you for doing it, and forgive me, I'm here to make your job a little tougher. Norwalk Harbor Keeper is asking for a rethink of the Walk Bridge project. That's our call to our neighbors.
Hooray.
And our challenge to the state. We have called for a full evaluation of all alternatives to the Walk Bridge project, which is a $1.1 billion project as of tonight and likely growing. And here's an opportunity to return some money to the Transportation Trust by fully evaluating alternatives to the lift bridge plan. And so, full disclosure, our group has sued the state. We have a suit in federal district court calling for an invalidation of the lift bridge project. We are not opposed to addressing the problems posed by the Walk Bridge. We are for a full and complete evaluation of alternatives. We believe there are a number of reasonable alternatives to look at. And so the question to you, Mr. Commissioner, with respect, is why not look at those alternative plans? Why not try to return some of this $1.1 billion and likely growing figure to the trust fund? Thank you.
So, quick answer, unsatisfactory. If we're being sued, I'm not going to comment on a lawsuit. I will tell you, separate from that, that we have done full evaluations with thousands of pages of documents. And if they're unsatisfactory and you win your lawsuit, something may happen from them. But we have followed prescriptively an alternatives analysis in detail, funded and approved by the Federal Transit Administration, which means they too will be sued. And so the
They've
outcome...
been named in the lawsuit as well.
Right, of course. So the outcome of the lawsuit is something that I can't comment on, and I won't comment further since we're in a legal challenge, and I'm sorry about that.
We're not asking you to comment on the lawsuit tonight. I mentioned it only as a matter of full disclosure so my neighbors can understand my perspective, and I'm not hiding anything.
No, I appreciate that.
The question to you is why not look at alternatives? Why not do a full evaluation of alternatives?
So I would say we believe we've done a sufficient and comprehensive look at alternatives, and you may have a different opinion.
Okay. You know, what I'd like to, and I think this is an important point because there's been discussion in Norwalk about what replacement should there be for the walk bridge. Should there be a lift bridge, as the DOT is proposing, or should there be a fixed bridge? And in the environmental study that the DOT did last year, they looked at all the options. They looked at doing nothing, replacement, fixed bridge, lift bridge. And there's 3 different types of fixed bridges, high, low, medium. And they evaluated them based on 10 criteria. And the high-span vertical lift bridge met all 10 criteria. The fixed bridges met 9 out of 10 criteria. The one criteria that it did not meet, if my memory is correct, is that boats would not be able to sail under the walk bridge up the Norwalk River, you know, towards Wall Street. And the reason that that was an issue is because that is a federally navigable waterway. My question is, and I asked it then and then I'm asking it now, is how important is that really for Norwalk to maintain that federally navigable waterway? The boat traffic is pretty small. There's a few barges maybe for Divine Brothers. I don't think O&G is doing much. And then for the few sailboats, you know, the marinas up there are really more power boats. And so also I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that the whole area is gentrifying. You know, it's the industrial uses are fading out, and you know, the Scale is building apartments right on Wall Street right now. The whole east side is pretty well gentrified. I understand the redevelopment is moving their redevelopment zone to the west bank of the Norwalk River. So, and I understand also the King Industries has bought property in Waterbury, and they may be looking to relocate up there. So I guess the question is, and I would ask the Commissioner this, is why does the DOT think it's so important that we maintain a federally navigable waterway for a few boats that really don't really call for it?
Well, because it is federal law, and we abide by federal law.
We didn't hear the answer.
It's a federal law.
Back here,
The Coast Guard is responsible for maintaining that as a navigable waterway. And two practical considerations. One, the cost of a lift bridge to maintain the opportunity forever for water uses on that side of the bridge is an 11% cost differential from closing the bridge forever. So as a cost benefit, is anybody with, first, I can't do that without violating federal navigable waterway. And second, is it really worth shutting off all future maritime uses, whatever they may be, and whatever water brings to the development potential for Norwalk forever for an 11% differential? That's why that one criteria matters.
Well, it wouldn't, but a point of, I guess, question is it wouldn't cut off all water use. It would just cut off water use of boats of a certain height.
Right.
Because right now, you can get under the bridge. It would just eliminate, really, sailboats and anything of any height.
Right.
So I think it's not all boats.
I understand the arguments. So we have evaluated them, made a decision, submitted it, have a record of decision, and now there's a lawsuit to challenge whether that's sufficient. That's the fact of where we are.
Gail, do you want to say something? No. Okay. All right, let's move on to another question. Yes, sir. Peter.
Fred, this one
I'm
on the
Peter
front has been
Lee
waiting
I
patiently.
lived in
Glasses with
Norwalk
the
for
gray.
25 years. I served on the Bike Law Commission. I want to go through briefly 4 projects that are being done in Norwalk, starting the small ones going up the walk bridge, and everybody can decide for themselves what is the value for dollar DOT is delivering. And then I'm going to go back and ask you about 2 of the specific statements that were made about that federal law requires you to maintain the navigable height. And then, so number one, a small example, $500,000 has been allocated to stop trucks from striking the bridge in South Norwalk. If you've been into any parking garage, you've driven underneath the bar that dangles and that warns you 9-foot high clearance or something like that. Sometimes there are chains dangling, and if the chains dangle at the top of your truck, you back away. It would be possible to dangle these chains 1 block before the intersection to the bridge, so that a truck that dangles those chains realizes, oh, I need to turn at this next turn and not go onto the bridge. That would cost a few $1,000s. Instead, we're going to spend $500,000. The money's been advocated or allocated for local accident reduction. That would save pedestrian lives. So as a bike walk commissioner, we'd like to see pedestrian lives saved. But if they came to us and asked us, how would you spend $500,000? It would be certainly different ways than that. Next example, $3 million is going to be spent East Avenue, where East Avenue hits Route 1. That is a congested intersection. Traffic does back up. What is going to be accomplished with this $3 million? We're getting 1 more lane painted on the roadway on the uphill on Route 1, so that you have an extra, now a dedicated turn lane to the left and still 2 lanes going uphill towards Stu Leonard's. There is enough space on the roadway as it is without spending $3 million to paint 3 lanes up the hill and 1 lane down the hill. If you look at the intersection now, you'll see that the lane down the hill is extremely wide and the whole thing is 42 feet wide. And Commissioner, you know very well that 10.5 feet per lane is well within federal standards. You could just paint it right now and be done. That would cost you about $10,000, but you're going to spend $3 million. Process that for a moment. Now we're going to go to the other end of East Norwalk, the railroad bridge, where they're going to replace the bridge, and for almost double the cost, rather than just do a repair, let's assume that it has to be replaced, which is really not clear. It could be repaired. But let's say you're going to replace it. They're going to virtually double the cost so that they can lower the roadway 3 feet. I had a surveyor check what is the height of the roadway right now, because I remember during, I don't remember if it was Irene or Sandy, but one of those storms, I tried to get through, and police were turning everybody away because there was water in that gully underneath the bridge. And the storm drains had backed up because sea level had risen to the point where water couldn't drain out. That is going to be dropped 3 feet. I had a surveyor check it. It's 18.5 feet right now. It would be dropped to 15.5. The FEMA maps for Norwalk show that if you're in a 12 to 14 level, that's a flood zone. So 15.5 is 1.5 feet above that. If you believe in physics that warmth melts ice and melting ice will raise sea level, there's widespread agreement sea level is coming up way more than 1.5 feet this century. The proposed work at extra expense, simply to get 18-wheeler trucks underneath, is going to cause that portion of the road to be inaccessible in the highest levels of sea level when there's storms. So in the worst possible moment, emergency personnel can't get in and residents can't get out. That's what they're accomplishing by doubling the cost of the project. Next example, the walk bridge. Now, I want to really clearly drill down on this thing. Do you know how many sailboats are being serviced right now up at the Norwalk River, Commissioner?
No,
How many would you estimate?
I don't know.
13. I counted the
Thank
masts there at United Arena right now. 13 masts. And are you aware of low-profile tugboats being fully capable of bringing Divine Brothers barges up without moving the bridge as it is? You could fix the bridge as it is, and the traffic would continue unimpeded. Are you aware of that? Because I've not heard that discussed.
Peter, let's, why don't you make that a statement, and
Okay.
Yeah.
we want to be respectful to our guests. So.
I
Yeah.
take it back.
Yeah.
But that has not been fully addressed. And the next thing is to state that federal law requires you to maintain the clearance. I'm sorry, it's false. It is extremely clear that the Coast Guard can change the clearance. Also, Congress can work to change the clearance. You can either delist it as a navigable river, or you can also negotiate with the Coast Guard to change the clearance. It is entirely possible. Jim Himes has offered to do it, but nobody asked him to, nobody took him up on the offer. So it is really patently disrespectful of the taxpayers of Connecticut to state that federal law requires you to consider no option of a lower bridge. And it is really patently disrespectful not to discuss openly how you could use a low-profile tug to do the same thing. And it also really, there is no possible way it costs 11% more to put a complicated movable mechanism in place as opposed to maintaining a fixed structure. And I question the kinds of numbers that are being quoted. If you look at the value that's being delivered to these other projects, it's just not there.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Peter. Jim, it's
Sure.
a lot there.
Yeah,
but,
I
just-
just,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, oh,
Okay, go ahead.
no, I just want to make sure, the woman in the front row has been having her hand up, and I want to make sure you get a chance to ask your question.
We will. Yeah.
So, look, I'm only going to state one more time, for the purposes of this record.
I was going to go back to the Wall Street.
That's,
You're talking Wall Street.
that's okay. I'm going to change back. So,
Yeah.
look, we have done an evaluation and engineering studies and cost benefits. It's public record. Obviously, there's disagreement. We've made decisions based on that. We intend to move forward. If we're stopped by a lawsuit, we'll stop. But at this point, we've made judgments about current and future transportation. And one thing is very clear that seems to be ignored. You cannot fix the current bridge. It has to be replaced. And so when you replace it, even if it was a fixed span bridge, and you look at what it would take to do that, there's a cost differential that was calculated, and we've had it checked more than once. And so obviously you don't believe it, but I'm not going to change that because we've checked it and we've checked it and rechecked it.
All right, well, that's kind of that. The only thing I want to ask is, Commissioner, it's true that under current federal law, you need to comply with that, and I think everyone here, we all agree we need to comply with current law, but a point was raised about a decertification process of the waterway. Who would be the responsible authority to make that request to change the waterway designation so that you could then potentially look at other options?
So if it were something that we decided was in the interest of our project and the future of transportation, we might do that.
Mm-hmm.
Our evaluation says it's not worth the cost differential for what the potential loss of navigable waterway is for this purpose.
Okay, all right, fair enough. All right.
The answer is the U.S. Coast Guard is.
Well, they're the ones who have to decide, that's correct.
Yes, okay.
But to initiate that, someone would have to initiate it.
So
If that made total sense, and it was a slam dunk question, then I guess we would do it. We have not made that conclusion to take that step because it doesn't, in our...
Someone evaluate the cost of what it's costing the merchants downtown Norwalk to have the downtown torn up for how many years?
So, obviously
I mean,
there is...
what if you had a hamburger stand down there in downtown Norwalk, or for God's sake, a
All right, well,
she Italian restaurant? Would you, would you?
I think that's a separate, are you asking, Jim, about the impact of the Walk Bridge project on Sono?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so obviously there are impacts. There are impacts from every project we do. We are not allowed by state or federal law to reimburse for those, but that's not something that it could be addressed a different way. It just can't be addressed with transportation dollars. So we're totally aware of it. It's not insignificant, and we're very sensitive to it as best we can, but we have to fix the bridge.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's,
Go ahead.
The taking down of the IMAX theater and the difference in taking down the high towers of the electric towers in the numbers that you had just spoken about.
Could you identify yourself, please, Robin?
I'm sorry, Robin Penna. I know that you had, thank you for coming and speaking with us today. The numbers that you have spoken about, the difference between repairing the fixed bridge and a lift bridge, you said it was 1.1 million?
No, 11% difference.
11% difference. But did that include the cost of taking down the IMAX theater and the cost of taking down the high tower electric towers, and also the devastation it's going to have to the Maritime Center in terms of the dust and the noise to the animals that are in the Maritime Center and that cost? Is that included in that percentage?
So I think I'll just differentiate between the cost, and yes, costs were included. The other, what I call environmental impacts are judged separately, but not in a cost equation. And those are activities that we're working with the aquarium on carefully to work through the construction and relocation issues.
So they're not part of that difference?
A dust issue for that is not included in a cost.
Okay, who's, Terry, who is that?
The woman in the front row with the glasses and gray sweater on. You've been waiting to ask a question.
Oh, yeah. Marcia, hi.
I'm not going to, I'm going to stay out of the walk bridge situation,
Okay.
but I would just like to, I'm Maria Bryant, resident and a member of the Norwalk Green Neighborhood Association. And I just support Mike McGuire's concept for a Wall Street train station. I think the time is right. I think it would be a seed that would energize that area, and we residents have been waiting a long, long, long time for Wall Street to live up to its potential. It has great potential for business, for residents, and public transportation. So I would just like to encourage you to think creatively and think outside the box. It's easy to say, no, there's so much going on. I understand your physical constraints, but this is something for not that much investment would provide a really huge return for Norwalk.
In revitalizing that area. Great point. Thank you,
Yes.
Maria.
Did you want to respond? Or?
Thank you. I mean, I have taken notes. If I'm typing, it's because I'm taking notes. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, I'm going to move over. Joe, do you want to say something? Yeah.
I usually don't need a microphone. Representative Lavielle, Williams, and Wood, and Commissioner Rediger, thanks for being here and organizing this. My name is Joe Schnierlein. I'm a resident of Norwalk. I've been studying Long Island Sound for over 40 years. I've taught marine science in high school, undergraduate level, and graduate level. So I'm not a rookie when it comes to talking about life in Long Island Sound. I am here to address the environmental impact statement that was put in our hands and is available online, and to me appears initially to be a very impressive document until you really read what's there. First, there are numerous organisms that are not listed. And Commissioner, I suggested to previous people that showed up for the hearings to get a hold of me. I could give you a list. So I'm going to leave the list right here that will enhance the animals that are affected in Long Island Sound in the immediate vicinity. Second, the author or authors did not look at the habitat of the Norwalk Harbor seasonally. The author or authors appear to have put the information together in a few visits and cut and paste data from NOAA documents. And NOAA rarely samples the Norwalk Harbor. Most of their work is done offshore. Third, with Maritime Aquarium's database, Harbor Watchers records, and the records of local fishermen, there is no excuse for missing local species. And since you are already being stretched, why not take advantage of free local talent to help tell you how to build an environmental impact statement? Again, it doesn't make sense. Fourth, depending on the season of the year, some of the animals are here, and the rest of the time, they may not be. There's no mention of that. Fifth, some of the animals come here just to breed. There's no accommodation for that. And with demolition or construction timing, either way, there has to be some consideration, or we could lose these animals from this area for a long time. 6th point, there's no recommendation or accommodation mentioned to minimize the impact of construction via the sound or anything else on the species. Even a simple net stretched across the river during demolition times would minimize the impact. Now, looking around here, I don't see enough gray hair here to know that there are people here who remember the fish kill we had at one of the first oyster festivals. You could smell that a mile away. Should that happen due to construction, you will have the entire Norwalk waterfront shut down. You will throw up just being present.
and to what was printed in the Hour just a few weeks ago, which said there are no dead fish in the harbor, somebody better go upriver. Because upriver, every week I went upriver. Starting in June into October, there were dead fish up the river. Should the menhaden population be similar to what we had in 2016 and 2015 when demolition takes place, that fish kill could go well beyond what we had for that first oyster festival when they hauled away tons of dead menhaden. There are many of us who have worked long and hard to get the inner and outer harbor to be a viable habitat and a healthy environment. I personally served on the Mayor's Water Quality Committee. That disappeared when the talk of the Walk Bridge went up. I also served on the Shellfish Commission. There are many families that count on the health of the harbor for a livelihood, as well as many families that count on the fish to supplement their diet. You walk along the shores here. Back during the Depression, the Whistleville population visited the shores, and they were proud to always say, we had holes in our socks, but we always had food on the table. There's a whole immigrant population now using the harbor just for that reason. It helps feed them. We don't want to take that away from them. Doesn't make sense. To see a document like the EIS for the Walk Bridge showing disregard for the life in the harbor published, to me, demonstrates a disregard for the residents of the world and what we really know. The double lift bridge makes no sense to me, not only for the cost, but in talking to the engineers, I pinpointed one problem. I said, how much is it going to cost to maintain this bridge? And we're talking about fiscal responsibility. He said to me, this would be the most expensive bridge to maintain, because you have 4 motors driving the bridge. We have a tough time maintaining 1 motor on 1 bridge. So over a long run, that doesn't make sense to me. And as far as the accessibility upriver, we are looking at maybe 10 years of being accessible upriver for boats that do not have a shallow draft. So you can build this magnificent bridge, and the Army Corps of Engineers has told Norwalk, and they are the ones that are responsible for dredging, they won't dredge upriver anymore because it's not a viable entity. So you build this beautiful bridge, and now you can't use it because you can't get upriver. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
I think it's important, having heard what you just said, Joe, and what Robin said a few minutes ago. There's 2 consideration sets here, really. One is all of the things about cost that we've said when we're in such dire fiscal circumstances. The cost question ought to be paramount, and the cost ought to include a lot of things, because when you're paying taxes or when you're giving up services, ADA services or services for the elderly, you don't care what bucket that money comes out of to give you the service. You just want the service. So there's the cost question, but there's also the question of all of those other contributing factors. What does each different solution that's possible for the Walk Bridge do to the city of Norwalk? And that has got to be part of the decision process. I think that's what we heard you say.
Yeah. Commissioner, do you want to respond, please?
Yeah, I would just like, if you have those comments in writing, I'll take them. Was that all of your comments?
I have the comments here.
If you wouldn't mind sharing them, I'd love to take them along with your... And just a second question. Did you submit those during the draft environmental impact process?
I submitted them much longer than what you got now.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to know if they were in the record, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Commissioner, for accepting those written comments. And would you, if anyone else in the audience has written comments or wanted to email you their written comments, would you be willing to accept those?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Good. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm trying to, sir, yes, please. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Sure, that's all right. My name is John Kuykendall.
Okay.
From Westport.
Yes.
So I appreciate you coming here tonight. Came here knowing the state was in dire straits and going to leave knowing it's even worse than I thought it was. But I appreciate you sharing at least the facts with us so we kind of know what's going on. I guess I have a comment and a question. On the comment, I traverse the state frequently, and sort of no shortage of places as you drive around the state. You can see opportunities for investment. It's clear from your presentation tonight there's not a lot of money available. I would argue the biggest choke points we have in the state are the interchanges between the highways. Most people, I think when they traverse, you're going 95 or the Merritt to 91 to 84, and every one of those interchanges has been designed as if maybe 5% of the highway volume is going to exit, when in many cases it's 50%. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but in a time of limited budget, much as I'd love to see 4 lanes on 95 the whole way, if you could just find a way to make 95 north to Route 8 north, instead of a big jug handle where everyone goes slow, how about 2 lanes of high speed, right? 91 north to 84 east in Hartford. They're not big relative to some of the other things. I think you could make an enormous impact on traffic problems. That's the comment. The question. 2 years ago, there was an announcement, which I happen to have here. There was a public hearing, I think, in this room about plans to rehabilitate I-95 between exit 16 and 17. You were going to redo this, I think, Strawberry Hill Bridge. You were going to, basically, it's the only stretch of 95 between probably Greenwich and New Haven that still has grass in the center median. There's accidents all the time. There's no breakdown lanes on at least one side. Again, this little press release says construction anticipated to begin spring 2017. Haven't seen anything about that. I live in Westport. You get on at exit 17. The entrance and exit ramps there are absolutely horrific. I mean, if we're not going to do the project, we've got to at least get some better pothole repair or something. So I'd just love to hear if that project has any plans to move forward.
Okay. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you. So first on the comments. If we get to you this report that we have on what we should be investing in, it is the bottlenecks and exits that are undersized and frankly historic in their design. So the Charter Oak Bridge, 91 to 84, is actually subject to a federal grant and or state funding. It is on the do not proceed list because we didn't get the federal funds and there's not enough state money to do anything but fix it right now. But it is one of the top 10 congested locations in the nation. And we make it a top priority. But it is subjected right now to the full cut of postponement because of state dollars. Similarly, we announced recently a series of investments on 95, not to widen all of 95, but the Route 8 interchange is one of those places which is a major bottleneck and is part of that program of potential investments. And so there is actually a series of bottlenecks that are priorities for us. Appreciate that. And I don't know the status of that project, and I'll have to get back to you. So if you could, so just for everybody's benefit, james.redeker@ct.gov. If you want an answer to a question I don't have tonight, send it to me and I'll get an answer.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yes, sir, in the front.
Yeah, I have a question. So my name is Ian Ward. I may live in Southport, but I go to college here at Norwalk Community College. So I do have a question. So I'm a user of UPass. For those of you who don't know, UPass is a service provided by CT Transit where, for those who are students, you can get a $20 transportation fee, and you can get unlimited bus service, train service within the state lines of Connecticut. It's one of the greatest things that I think the state has ever provided. Now, I do know that UPass is still going on right now until July 30th, I believe, and it's going to be continuing until December 31st of 2018. My question is, will it continue into 2019, given how the state's financial budget is, kind of low for transportation? Also, another question I do have is that, since you are planning on getting the CT Avenue shuttle on Mondays through Saturdays, that shuttle does go to Norwalk Community College during the nighttime, and a lot of students who have night classes or who are attending nightly events there are going to be affected by these cuts. And I'm not sure if the 341 from Stanford is going to be going during those nights now. So let's say if students can't get a car or they can't afford an Uber, how are they going to be able to get to and from NCC during those night hours? But also too, even if you could save money for transportation, like with this whole new car tax, are you planning on running bus services late into the night, as more workers are working late into the night, and how like a lot of young people can't afford a ride share, and how they want to have better access to transit during like the later hours of the night.
Oh, I apologize, I forgot to ask you, could you just state your name, please?
Yeah, I did. I said my name is Ian Ward.
Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry.
So the UPass program, thank you for your support for that program. It is an absolutely earth-shattering impact program.
I mean, I wouldn't be able to go to Norwalk without it.
Understood.
Transit for me, like, it costs on average, I think, $20
a semester.
No, I mean,
Oh, I'm
like
sorry.
without UPass, it would be like, out like hundreds of dollars just to go to college, via transportation only, since I don't have a car.
Sure. So that was the intent of the program. There's two purposes of that program. One was to create opportunity for people to get to school when they could not, to get to a job when they could not, to get the health care when they could not as students. And it has been transformational for just about everyone I've talked to that uses it. And frankly, it represents the best of public-private partnerships in that students are paying for that. And while that sounds like maybe a tough thing, at $20 a semester, it is transformational. It is proposed to go to $22 if this fare increase goes forward, but we intend to continue it in this budget proposal either way. It has a dramatic impact on people. And with regard to the bus route, I can answer it. Kim, can you?
The 341 is a Connecticut transit route, so I can't
Okay,
speak
thanks.
to that, but it does link with Norwalk. And yes, the evening shuttles are slated for elimination if we do receive a 15% cut. It's our most certainly effective ridership, but lowest ridership.
So I would just mention that. We have, for the last, since I've been in this position as commissioner, one of the things that we have clearly recognized and have tried to address in some fashion is the fact that our entire economy is a 24/7 economy. But particularly when you get to the student population, classes are all day and into the night. And when buses don't run late into the evening or trains don't run, it prohibits the ability to get an education. So the first example of when we changed that was Naugatuck Valley Community College, when there was no service beyond 7 o'clock and there was no student population that could take it. And that student body voted $1 a student per semester just to give money to run the bus, and it's packed. So I understand your point. It would be devastating to many people if these budget cuts go through.
Well, and I just want to reiterate that that is what the governor is proposing, what the commissioner outlined, and I can tell you that I personally and a number of my colleagues find those service cuts to be unacceptable. And as I mentioned, there are bills that have been submitted that would address the revenue side of that issue, and so those services could be maintained. So we still have several weeks to go in our session, but I want you to know that we hear what you're saying, and a number of us have taken steps to look to address that.
All right, thank you. And also another quick question here. When it comes to the Barnum Station in Bridgeport, has that project been delayed now since of these budget cuts? The Barnum Station between Stratford and Bridgeport?
Yes, it is indefinitely on hold.
Okay.
As is the Merritt 7 station, as is the Orange train station, as are 6 stations on the Hartford line.
Okay.
So all these stations that were in design have now been put on hold.
So also, I'm a little confused about the high-speed, line between Hartford. Where would it go to, that new Hartford rail line?
So it goes from New Haven to Hartford to Springfield. In a couple of years, Massachusetts is intended to extend that to Greenfield, but it is the same route that goes to Vermont to Burlington. It's called the Vermonter. And someday in the future, it's extended, the intention is to get it into Montreal, where we've been working through customs so that that route could get you from Montreal to New York and beyond.
Okay, thank you, Ian, for that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, in the back there? Yes.
Red sweater?
In the red sweater?
Yes.
Yes.
My name is Miss Mary, but I was trying to figure out where you could go in for some more funding. I'm thinking about grants from the corporations such as Walmart. Walmart's going to lose a lot of their employees if they can't get there. You check with Pepsi or Coca-Cola or some of those that would give you a grant. Especially here for Norwalk, they can make up that 1.2 million just for the year. You know, then you can keep going back to the well, and they'll give it to you.
Thanks for the idea. I will say that we have approached companies throughout Connecticut who need services provided to a new location or relocated location to, and in some cases, we have actually had success there. In a small fashion, on a one-by-one, it sounds like it works. What it doesn't do is fix the massive problem in the transportation fund. And really, so it's not an easy answer to give, but a corporate sponsorship of $2 million or $3 million doesn't address the $388 million 5-year shortfall or the billions of dollars of shortfall in capital funding. And so I sympathize. I love the idea, and we have taken it to heart in many places. And we also do that with the public sector. So we have a partnership with UConn, we have a partnership with the UPass, with all the universities, and we do have several corporate sponsorships in existence, but not specifically to try to avert this particular crisis because it's so massive.
Yes.
My name is Sheldon Green. I live at 108 in Canaan Avenue, Broad River Housing, which is a senior residence. Of course, the elimination of number 1 absolutely maroon us. The last pharmacy in the neighborhood has just closed, the Rite Aid. Now, I am not covered by the Americans with Disability Act. I may be 75 years old, and on the weekend I walk 1.25 miles from where I live in any kind of weather to reach the bus hub, to be able to go to a grocery store or a pharmacy. I also attend classes at MCC. Thank them, they are wonderful. They encourage seniors to be part. And with the elimination of the evening shuttles, how the hell do I walk from NCC to Broad River, which is about 3.5 miles? I walk at a pace of 120 steps a minute. I have a very fast pace. But as I said, I'm 75 years old. This year I'm going to be 76. How much longer can I do this? 3 questions then. Can I, 1, be covered by the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act? I don't have any disabilities except in my head. My brain is slightly fried from age. And I'm still willing to...
I don't know about that, Sheldon. I think you're pretty sharp. Yeah.
Look pretty good for 75 to me.
At night I walk with a flashing automobile lantern, the train hanging from my coat that I not be hit by a car, because the shuttle hits on 7 Main Avenue, the Dunkin' Donuts there, and I still have to walk New Canaan Avenue at night. Wonderful. Now, as a transportation commissioner, can 3 problems with Kim's help, and I've spoken to Kim, be solved? Number 1, perhaps the provision by the state of more efficient vehicles where ridership is low. That would be easier to maintain and less costly to operate. Question 1. Question 2. I realize that Wheels operates under a franchise, and those routes are read into whatever legislative practice there be. And I suggested to Kim the consideration of 2 things. 1, during the year, a shopper's park and shop route. I am sure Home Depot, in their generosity, would be one of the commercial establishments willing to fund this park and shop. And that revenue could go into supporting the bus system, at least here in this town, if not working in other towns with their local merchants. 2, during the summer, a beach route. Yes, a route starting perhaps way up at Main Avenue on the old Perkin Elmer property, running from there to the beach, instead of the double fare. The fare would be increased to allow for one additional thing: a beach chair and my picnic box to be put in the back of the bus. In other words, the bus would become kind of like with limited ridership, but it would provide the service to allow folks to access the beach at a premier fare. Just a couple of ideas that would take. Now, from Kim's people, I know that my #1 route is they're providing a route for 5, at most 7, at the very top. This is a large vehicle. Years ago, and Westport has them, the jitney-sized vehicles. I don't know the cost of maintenance of a jitney compared to a diesel bus. I do know that there are diesel vehicles which are similar but smaller in size to the gasoline jitneys. I am simply looking, sir, for alternatives that would allow this. Look pretty damn good, except for the gray hair.
Well, Sheldon, I have to ask you to, can we just wrap up, please?
The point is, I would like to preserve what we have. If we can't do it the way we have it, help us to allow people like me and these youngsters who go to NCC to continue to attend and access the facilities in our community.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you, and you're welcome to join my staff too, if you'd like, because you have great ideas.
If you're inviting me, perhaps
There you
I can
go.
use
So, couple points. Just for information one, the ADA eligibility is for service that costs twice as much. You probably don't want that. And frankly, that's another issue
better
which...
than being marooned.
Well, but it parallels existing routes, so it wouldn't help you. And it would cost twice as much, so that's probably not a good option. I'll be honest and with my legislators here. If budget were not an issue, I would reduce the ADA fare to the same fare as the bus. That was a policy decision long before I got to Connecticut. That makes no sense to me. Second, with regard to alternative types of vehicles, it is clearly something we need to look at. But alternative jitneys and smaller diesel buses really don't save that much money because the operating cost is about the same, the driver gets paid the same, right? So the fixed cost of that is not going to change much. What we need to do is look at alternative ways of getting service, that last connection, that last mile to get you where you've had to go in different ways. And there are lots of models that are being tried in other places. And they're sort of the, I hate to say the word, let's not use Uber, but it's the on-demand services under contract at much lower costs that could fill that gap without running full-size diesel buses, which is clearly what we have to look at. At the same time, if, again, we were to continue forward with plans and funding as we envisioned them, our plan and the governor's plan was to expand the reach of bus service in Connecticut so that every person in an urbanized area in Connecticut would have a bus route within a half a mile and be able to get wherever they have to go. That costs money, not a lot, because bus service is actually the cheapest way to get public transportation across the state of Connecticut. That is our goal, and we're striving to get there. If we can fix this budget and get moving, that's where we're going to be.
Kim, did you just want anything to add to that?
Yes, just really very quickly, the department has asked me to sit on them with a group of people to look at some of the things that the commissioner is talking about, and it's called micro-transit, as you said, a demand response type of look of doing transit in smaller type vehicles, or kind of do a route deviation so that you can cover larger areas where the population is less dense. So we are working, we saw a demo of that just this week with some of the commissioner's staff. So thank you for inviting us in and participating.
Thank you, Kim. So we have time for, because we have to leave the room at 9. We have time for 2 more questions.
Mike Mishek Novak has had his hand up too.
All right, well, Kevin, I was...
Someone set the timer for 3 minutes. Thank you for coming. It's great. I'll be very honest, I'm gonna bash you a little bit. But thank you for coming. 'Cause I know you got food sandwich job.
Well, just
So
wait, which one? All
bash him
four
in
of us, or-
a respectful
No, it's
way.
okay, it's
You
okay.
asked the question.
Okay, yeah.
You asked the question about will you give a cup of coffee and some money to pay for transit. I don't drink coffee, but I said maybe a Coors Light, but I'm not even willing to do that. It's because of trust. It's because of trust. And that is, I'm willing to pay more. I'm willing to pay more taxes, but I question the logic that the DOT uses in some cases. I have two examples, one that Dr. Libre talked about, and then another one about the I-95 bridge. This is a presentation I sent to Bob Duff. You can't see it. It says CDOT, trying to fix problems we don't understand, burning Connecticut taxpayers money we don't have, and irate taxpayers smart solutions for Route 1 and 53. It involves about $10,000 in paint to try a left-hand turn lane on Route 1. Before you tear it up, before it's half done as it looks right now, the optics are terrible. So when I drive through it, I say, I don't trust giving more money, $3 million, when in here, which I'm going to leave, I have 4 copies for you guys, with my home phone, my cell phone, and email. I drive through, I'm like, why didn't they try paint to paint a left-hand turn heading towards Stu Leonard's on Route 1?
Got it, thank you.
Okay, so that's one.
And there's an answer to that right now?
This
There's a quick answer to
so
that?
you can do any answer. I'm
Okay,
going to
go
burn
ahead.
through this and you can, yeah.
Okay.
This second one, you're going to redo the Connecticut Yankee Doodle Bridge. It's project 102-348. The state of Connecticut proposed to spend $400,000 to shuttle pedestrians over the bridge on the sidewalk that many of you probably don't even know exists while the construction was going on. I run across the bridge once a week. It's a useless waste of $400,000. I put a proposal in here addressing those issues.
Thank you.
My simply thing is stop, think. Then I'll give you more money over a course like that.
Thank you. No, really, appreciate your comments. And I will admit that there are many things that I question that happen to the department, and my staff has gotten quite used to that. So I'm more than happy to bring up your questions as well. With regard to one issue, though, I'll make an interesting point that is really, I haven't brought it up. We don't have any paint this year because I can't afford it. It was taken out of the budget. There's no paint. That's how bad it is. We have no paint. Sorry. That's how bad the budget is.
Okay.
$1,000 for left-hand turn.
I'm with you.
Tony, you get the last question because we're running out of time.
Representative, if I may yield it to my senior captain in the room, Captain Kunkel, I'd be proud to do that if you.
All right, Captain. All right, fire away, Captain.
Hi, my name is Bob Kunkel. I'm a licensed marine engineer. I've been in the transportation business for over 40 years. I've been with the I-95 Corridor Coalition, the federal government. I'm bringing a $12 million transportation project that is designated by the Federal Marine Highway Project and is also supported as a sponsor of the Connecticut Port Authority. My question, and maybe to wrap this up, is we've heard a lot of local issues here that require funding. We know that we've got a walkway bridge issue. My question would be is with all the construction projects that are listed in all the public documents, that these projects are being shut down for lack of funding, and considering what could be done for the citizens of Norwalk in bus issues and train stop issues and things that do not cost $1.1 billion, why is it that we're moving forward with a walkway bridge refurbishment that doesn't seem to bring any commercial viability to the city, is going to do damage to the environment and the animals based upon Joe's statement, and also the fact that I have a very large concern on what it could do to the oyster fields if that 100-year-old turnstile is ripped out improperly. So what I'm asking here is why aren't we looking at trying to support the commissioner and not spend $1 billion to replace a walkway bridge at this point in time and deal with some of the budget issues that remain that may be able to help you and help the citizens of Norwalk? I think that's the question that may be outstanding based on this meeting. And by the way, Commissioner, I sell coffee. If you can get me 10 more cents, I'd be happy to give you that.
thanks for the comments. I'm not going to respond to that because it's a big question. Because as you know, we are trying to move forward with a bridge that we think is important, that is important to the whole Northeast Corridor, and I don't necessarily believe that we should do anything different than we're doing. So, different topic, longer discussion, so I'll move on.
Well, before we do, Commissioner, could I just ask a variation of that question, and that is, why does the DOT believe that we need a new bridge, like whether it's a fixed bridge or a vertical lift bridge, as opposed to doing the options of doing nothing or just simply repairing the current bridge? Could you elaborate on that?
So the current bridge cannot be repaired and sustained, and it can't be maintained in any cost-effective way. It can't be replaced as a fixed span without spending almost as much money as a lift bridge, and that's all the alternatives that were put out there. And after years of extensive study, we have made a conclusion, and we're going to stick with it for now.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to everyone. But I do want to thank you. We all want to thank you for coming out. And I also want to, I'll stick around after we adjourn, and maybe, I don't know if the Commissioner can, but I do want to thank Commissioner Redeker. Obviously, some of the answers that he gave are not answers that we were looking for or hoping for. But I do want to congratulate him for showing up and being here and facing us directly. And that's. So thank you all for coming.
Great, thank you.